Welcome back, everybody, to the Talking Sportsbook show. Coming up on this edition, we are going inside the world of scouting with Chris Robinson. The book is called The Scouting Game. It's out now. And if all you think, by the way, that a scout does is, rock up at a game, get a nice padded seat, have a coffee, chat with all your scouting friends, make a few notes on your iPad and earn a lot of money and enjoy a stress-free, enjoyable life, this will be a bit of an eye-opener. And if you're one of those that fancies yourself as a spotter of great talents, this book is very much for you, as it lays out in extreme details what a scout does and, more importantly, what is expected of them. Now, just a reminder that you can catch up with all of the previous editions of the show on the website www.talkingsportsbooks.com or on any of the main streaming providers. First up today, though, here's a look at the month's top-selling and soon-to-be-released books. And from the bookstore to the magazine stand, here's a look at what's making the front pages of this month's sports media. Back to today. Chris Robinson has spent a lifetime in the business of football. He spent 12 years at Chelsea's academy before moving on to Southampton, which is where you can find him today. I met up with him a few days ago to talk about his new book, The Scouting Game. So I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed this book from start to finish, because it's unlike any other book on football. And as I said, I posted a tweet on social media which got a few people agreeing. But I just said, if you think you know what talent is, read this book, and it will give you a real reason why you have no idea about what talent is. But it's a game of persistence. It's a numbers game. Get the perspective right, or you run out of patience. That was one of the first points you make in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. As scouts, we go out every week, most of us. I watch about 8 or 9 games a week, I suppose, live and on video, and 99% probably of scouting, I think I say this in the book, is saying no. So, in other words, you're going to spend 99% of your time watching players that you don't want to sign. And unless you can deal with that, then it gets very frustrating very quickly. And even those that you like, and you, as a normal scout, you take them along to your club, as it were, and you say, I watch this player and I really like him. And your boss, whoever it is, the head of recruitment or whatever, might say, yeah, fine, but we've got this one or that one. So even when you find players you like, it doesn't mean your club is going to sign them. At any age, this can be the case. So you have to have, it's just two ways of looking at it, Tim. I think it's either terrific resilience or extreme stupidity.
I always say I can tell the best and worst player in any game of football within 5 minutes.
Yes.
I've heard that quote, obviously, a few times, having been in and around the game in the media for 30-odd years. And I've seen fans, as soon as that's tried to go, oh, yeah, right, of course you go. How can you tell within 5 minutes, within such a short period of time?
Yeah.
How do you know?
Well, the basics of the game are very simple, aren't they? It's control, pass, and move. Everything is worked around that. And we make it complicated so people like me and you can earn a living out of the game, I think. But the basics are simple. So actually, if you can see, can a player control the ball? Can they pass it and can they move? Well, you can tell that pretty quickly. So if a player really stands out, then that's not hard to pick out. If they're really awful, that's not hard to pick out. It's all the so-and-sos in between that are the problem, because they might not be good today, but they could be good tomorrow, or they might not be having an off day, and that's the fascinating thing about it. You're having to guess, an educated guess, hopefully, what would that player look like, though, in my team, which might be at a different level. And that's where the experience comes in and the calculation. But the really good ones and the really poor ones, no problem.
You always laugh when you see somebody say, I saw him when he was 7 years old. I knew he'd play for England. I love that quote. And how many times have you heard it?
I mean, the best example of that is Raheem Sterling. I know personally at least 4 people who credit themselves as being the person who discovered Raheem Sterling at 7, 10, 11, whatever age, And I suppose one of them must have done, I don't know. But it's like, you see, whoever is the latest, Jude Bellingham, I saw him at 7, knew he played for England. And I always said, you should come and do my job, because I can't tell. And I say to my scouts, going to run a team of scouts now, that, give me 2 years ahead. So if you're bringing in a player now at 10, tell me what they'd be like now. Would they be in our starting team? Would they be in our top 5? Do you think when they get to 12, they're still going to be really good for us? That's as far as I ask them to go. I don't say if they're bringing them at 10, will they play for the first team? It's just a ridiculous question. There's so many variables and so many things can change and go wrong. So there is a practical application of that, as I say, in trying to focus scouts on what we can reasonably forecast and what is just, pointless.
It is a long slog, isn't it? I mean, again, one of your quotes, and again, this has been used by many people over time, that old military saying that time spent on recon is never wasted.
Yeah. I think one of the really interesting things about scouting, when you go out and watch a game, you never know what you're going to see. That's what keeps us, that's what gets us out of bed in the morning and gets us out in the rain and whatever. You never know what you're going to see. It's very exciting, the prospect, if not in reality always. But the other thing is, you can see somebody and you think, well, they're not right for us now because that's not what we're looking for. But then a few months later, the circumstances may change. Yeah. And you remember. I mean, my wife always says, I can remember every footballer I've ever seen, and I've been in this game 30 years in the professional game, but I can't remember what day the bins go out, So it's a selective memory, but I can remember players, and you do get, you get a couple of scouts together, I don't know what the collective noun for scouts would be. A gossip, I would say, probably a gossip of scouts. We get them together and we would talk about players. And do you remember, what about that one? And have you heard about this one? And so on. And it is extraordinary, really, because these things do stick in your mind. And sometimes it might not be today, it might be tomorrow, it might be 6 months that you think that player, yeah, they might be the one worth doing the job that we're looking at now. Absolutely.
It's been the last part of this football industry to become professional, if you like. I mean, it used to be that middle-aged white bloke with a business card and whatever. Why has it taken so long? When you consider the potential value to the club at the end of the day, if you've got good talent spotting. I mean, when you consider what its potential value is, why has it been so slow to become as professional as it should be?
Partly because the scout is completely undervalued and unrecognised. All of those players that we will watch in the World Club Championship, perhaps, or in the Premier League, they've all been scouted by somebody, at some point. Every player has. And how often do you even get to hear who that scout was? You never do.
Yeah.
And so when I go about from one club to another watching games, we can get treated awfully at some grounds as well. And that's from other academies. And it's all part of this process of seeing scouting as something slightly seedy, something under, a bit cloak and dagger, and a bit shady and dodgy. And all of this feeds to a situation where scouts are very poorly paid. So I know somebody at Chelsea who signed over 80 players, including many of the top names. Ray Bembridge now. And so Reece James, Conor Gallagher, Trevor Chalobah, Nathaniel Chalobah, and on and on and on. And what's their value to? Has their value?
He should be arriving at Cobham in a convertible Bentley.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, there's no reflection of that value that you help create. Now, you're not the only one that creates it. It's all the coaches, once a player comes in, that develop them. It's a team thing. But surely the one who finds them in the first place should be some benefit. You used to be in the situation quite often where if a player you scouted then turned pro or whatever, you would get a bonus. Most clubs don't do that now. Those bonus schemes have gone out because it created a lot of arguments about who actually saw them first. And much more scouting now is a team approach. If I see a player I like, I get someone else to go and look at them. And so it's not just a solitary, I saw that player, or rarely is so solitary as saying, I saw that player, that's my player, and that's it. And so it caused more problems than it solved, I think. But that has led to the situation where scouts are really poorly paid. Lots of clubs are employing scouts, not employing scouts, I should say, but they have them as volunteers. They don't even get paid, or they get paid expenses at best. And when they do get paid, even for big clubs, part-time scouts going out, doing Saturday, Sunday mornings, 1 or 2 games in the week, you might get £400-500 a month part-time. It's not at all well paid. People certainly don't do it for the money. So that's all feeds into this. There's scouts, and there's a queue. If I advertise for a scout now, I'll have 100 applicants within a day because everybody thinks they can do it, and everybody still wants to do it to be part of the game. So
just give them your book. Say, have a read of this, and then come back and see if you can do it. The most asked question in your line of work. And again, you can imagine this, the phone rings, or parents, or whoever. What do you look for in a player?
Yeah,
this is the most asked question.
Yeah, absolutely, and I will go usually on those basics that I talked about: pass, control, and move. But the actual answer is whatever we're looking for in the club. what we don't have. You're looking for players who are better or different from what you've got. So you can, and this is very difficult for parents to appreciate, that your kid may be a really terrific striker, let's say, but we've already got a really good striker at that age. So we don't need another one unless they're better. And you say, well, why have you scouted that kid for my kid's team? Because my boy's a better player. Well, yeah, but your boy's this type of player, and we're looking for that type. So you're often scouting for what you need, you know, and so it is not as straightforward as saying, well, my kid's a good player, therefore. I remember when I was at Chelsea, I had 12 years at Chelsea in the academy there, in the recruitment team, and often parents would say to me, my kid's the best in his school, you know, or the best in his town. And I said, well, that's very good. That's good luck to them. We want to know, is he the best in Europe at 10, 12, 14? Because that's the standard they've got to be when they get to 18. You're judged as an academy on the players that you get into the first team. So that's the standard. So that's who those players are going to be competing against as they get older. And so and for parents, then parents are not going to see that context. You know, they're not going to know that standard because they don't watch it every week. And so that can be very difficult for us to explain. But at the heart, as I say, go back to pass, control, and move. You know, can they do those things? That's what we're looking for. But then there's all the variations. You know.
Yeah, because there was the 4-point technical, physical, psychological, social, or you can add tactical into that as well. You know, and again, when you're looking at a player, having all of those cogs going around in your mind, what sort of becomes clear to me over the time of reading that book is it would take you years to be able to get into a position where you could walk into a ground and sit there and make perfectly qualified judgments.
Yes. Certainly that is the case if there is a lot riding on your decision. I went to watch a player recently, an under 14, playing for a smaller academy, and I was the last in the line of scouts that had seen him, and it was the last game of the season. I had to make a decision. Would we try and sign that player for whom we'd have to spend money, over £100,000? Would we then be ready to invest in him with 4 years education and 4 years host family, because we'd have to move him at 14, move where he lives, not his family, but him.
Yeah.
And that's a massive decision and an impact not just on your club, but particularly on this young person and their family. And it comes down to me standing by the side of a pitch, watching a game, not a great game, and having to make that sort of final decision. And that's the end of a sort of scouting process. But there's no getting away from it at the end of the day. When you're the head of the department, it's your name on the line. But you either deal with that or you don't do it. You know, that is the job. And you are judged on whether you make the right decisions, and you won't get them all right. You have to accept that as well. And of course you can do all your due diligence, and of course you get a number of scouts to watch in a number of different games, but ultimately someone has to make the decision. And if you're the decision maker, then there's a lot going on what you see when you're standing there, you know, on the side of a rubbish pitch. It was, as it happened, you know, is this kid worth all of that? That's tough to decide.
Can they play? Can they control a ball with either foot? Can they pass? I mean, these things sound simple. Can they pass? Can they pass with either foot? Can they strike a ball cleanly over 5 to 50 meters? Can they spin or swerve the ball? Can they win a ball? And as well as doing all these things, everybody must contribute to defending. Whatever the position they're in, they all have to contribute.
Yeah. And of course, often the answer to a lot of those questions is no, not yet. So you're rarely seeing you're looking at a performance, but you're looking for potential. So then you have to bring your experience to bear to say, well, he doesn't use his left foot enough, but we can teach him that. I think he looks willing to learn, and yes, the runs that he makes are not the best runs, but we can teach him that. And so that is where it gets very difficult to judge what they might be like in a couple of years, I say only 2 years ahead, but with all the better training and coaching and everything you want to provide, because we don't know these players. So when we're watching a game as scouts, we are searching for clues. That's all we're doing. And we certainly don't know them in terms of what their psychological makeup is. Are they winners? Are they team players? We're looking for clues. And there's things, little tells. When their team score, do they celebrate? Does it matter to them? Because you need that just character and desire. So there's little things that you look for that you hope are indicating what the reality of that player as a person might be. And how they respond when a coach gives them an instruction from the sideline. So, because you know, if you're going to bring them to your club, if your club's a bigger one, they're going to need to be good learners. And so, okay, you're going to be able to find that out perhaps down the road, you know, when you start doing your due diligence on them and their family, all that sort of recruitment stuff, which is very important. But when you're just stood on the side of a pitch, you're searching for clues. So if I want to know how well, for example, they take on board coach instructions, that means I've got to sit close to stand close to where their coach.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I won't hear. So all these things, one leads to another, you know, and you learn these things over time to hopefully get better at them. But it is about educated guesswork with a lot riding on it at times.
The psychological aspect is very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
More so, I think, than some of the other aspects about, you know, whether or not they can head the ball where they want it to go, which was, you drop in little lines like that appear and you just think, well, that's bloody obvious. And then you just sit there and watch them play and you think, yes, well, he actually can't do that. He can head the ball, but it's not where he wanted it to go. But
absolutely. And of course, just on heading, Tim, sorry to jump in. I mean,
go on.
It's getting restricted now. For all the reasons that we know in the game, and it's virtually going to get to the situation where it's banned. I don't think they need to bother banning it in this country because no one can head the ball now. No one's taught to head the ball properly anyway. So you rarely see, even at the top level, you rarely see people with great heading technique. It's dying out of our game because no one crosses the ball and so on and so forth. But yeah, the psychological aspect is really difficult to come to. And when you look at sort of players that are about 16, let's say, in the top academies, they're all good players. They're all good athletes. They're all good technical. The ones that will get picked out, for example, Conor Gallagher, my wife's favourite. Conor wasn't the best player technically at 14, 15, 16 at Chelsea, but he always had this 100% drive and desire every training session, every game. And that's driven him on to play for Chelsea, captain Chelsea, play for England, now great career at Atletico Madrid. And he's a really good player, but he's still, you can guarantee 100% every training session, every game. And that's driven him on beyond what were probably better players than him technically when he was 14 or 15, for example. Character and desire, so important.
Yeah, you said that. Are they emotionally brave, physically and emotionally brave? Are they winners? I mean, you talked about Conor Gallagher. He ticks all these boxes. Persistent of what they do when they lose the ball. What do they do when they lose it? Can they cope with setbacks? And can they control themselves? Is a key thing, isn't it?
And again, it's age specific. So I went to watch a kid at age 10. I think I put this in the book. And it was a final. And I'd seen him a couple of times before, went to watch him again. His team lost the final. I went to speak to his dad and him, and the boy was in tears. And his dad said, "Oh, I'm really sorry. That he's in." I said, "He's just lost a final. I'd be in tears if I was him. There's nothing wrong with that. He didn't lose his emotional control on the pitch. He was crying afterwards. That's a big plus to me because it mattered to him. So, and of course." Players will make mistakes. They might lose control in games. And one of the great ironies when we come back to psychology again is that coaches always want good kids in their squads, kids who listen, kids who will learn well, and nice kids, So you can go to a club and it can be full of nice kids and none of them are any good, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you're good enough. If you're a really good kid and you listen and you try hard, all that is great. But sometimes the real talent might be a kid who is a pain in the backside to work with, you know. And then that's a careful calculation then of, is the game worth the candle? Are you going to put up with all that? I often get asked if someone's parents are a nightmare, will you still sign them? And I said, depends how good they are. You know, frankly, if they're not, if it's a marginal, you think, well, I don't know, can we really deal with that? If they're really good, yeah, okay, we'll find a way of managing the parents, sort of thing. So it's not even a case of saying we want a particular type of person. We prefer certain things. And also, Tim, things are changing. Young kids today respond differently and have perhaps different standards than they did back in the dark ages when I was young, you know? So sure. I would expect as a minimum, kids will turn up on time, they'll be ready, they'll have all their kit, and they'll be ready to start work when we ever, you know, if it starts at 10 o'clock, you're ready at 5 to 10. Well, what about if kids don't see things that way or they don't respond that way? Does that mean what is non-negotiable then in terms of behaviour? And what do we put up with if they're really good? That's a challenge when you're bringing kids into the professional football system, because as we know, some of the best players can be some of the most complex characters. You think of Paul Gascoigne, for example, you know, probably the best, most talented player in his generation, you know.
Sure.
Well, I'm sure he wasn't always easy to deal with. But was he worth it? Yes, he was, you know.
Decision making. This is such a key moment for any player in any game. You know, you can be sat there watching it. You can see, you know, the player in possession of the ball. You can see movement of other players off the ball, and then he does something completely different to what he should have done, and you're wondering what is going through his mind. So again, this process of finding somebody who has the ability to make a decision, the right pass at the right time, when to tackle, when to drop off, you know, all of these key elements. Again, in terms of, you know, the list of things you're looking for, where does decision making come into that?
Yeah, it's really important. And you see a lot of players who actually are better in training than they are in games. And part of that reason, often, not always, but often, is that the pressure of a game begins to affect their decisions, and they begin to doubt themselves, or they begin to hesitate, or whatever it might be. They lack confidence, and that can delay the decision, or they play safe. You know, I get driven to distraction by the number of midfield players you see who, when they get the ball, their first instinct is, can I pass sideways, can I pass back? Well, Cesc Fabregas, who's a great player, said the first job of a midfielder is, can I pass the ball forward, because that's going towards the opposition goal. So you're not always going to do that. So sometimes those players will play safe, and those to me can look, it can look quite neat, you know, neat football, get the ball, two-touch football, pass it back, we're keeping the ball. I'm thinking, we're getting nowhere, though, with this. This is boring, you know. We're not going to be going forward. So sometimes you want people to be making brave decisions. You want them to be trying things. So you have to accept it's not always going to work out. You know, I was talking to a young player this morning, funnily enough, and their parent, and I was saying, look, it's good that you take people on. And as a forward, you want to do that. We want you to do that. But you're not always going to be successful in taking people on. What we're looking for is, are you taking them on at the right time? So are you doing that one-to-one? Is your decision, I'm going to try and take them on now because they're the last man. And if I beat them, I'm in. Or I'm into a big space, or I'm in on goal. If you're trying to take them on and there's 3 or 4 other players around you, then that's not a good decision. So we have to teach them how to make that decision? You have to look, you have to scan, you'll be checking your shoulders, and then you hope that they have that instinct. You can develop it in training, but a lot of it is either there or not. And sometimes you will see players who just seem to have that radar or helicopter vision. You know, they're what we call, they see the pass. You know, they seem to understand where to really hurt the opposition. And that's a joy to watch when you see a young player who has that vision, you know, and it has that instinct to really just play the ball in that most of us wouldn't have thought of doing or wouldn't even have seen. And that's a special talent when you can find that sort of vision, that sort of decision making. But defenders, when to tackle, when to hold off, when to sit off. You see some defenders now, they'll sit off and they'll sit off and they'll sit off, and the opponent has a shot at goal, and you think, well, no, that was the wrong decision. You've got to engage at some point to stop them. So you're looking. Some of that will improve an experience, of course, but when you see instinctive, or what seems to be instinctively good decision making, then that is very exciting from a scout's point of view.
One of the other things that you look for that people, unless you're actually at a game, don't look at or can't see if you're watching on television is movement.
Yes.
Runs off the ball. Do they vary their runs? Can they press? You make a point in the book. You say very few players develop good movement without being coached in it in the first place. It's not something that comes naturally to the majority.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that is something as a scout, when you go and watch a player, they might be 12, 13, they're forward again, let's say, and all their runs are straight line runs, or they're getting automatically like a magnet dragged towards the ball. You can think to yourself, well, okay, they're not making good decisions, they're not making good movement, but we can teach them that. Because what you want to see them doing, I was taught when I was a kid, a young striker, you make one run for the centre half, then one run for you. So in other words, you move the centre half out of the space that you want to go into, and then you run into it. So diagonal runs, curved runs, these sorts of things. But you very rarely see that as an instinct. That is something that has to be taught. And so again, it will be something I'd be thinking, okay, they're 14, they haven't got that instinct. We can teach them it. Do I think they're going to be the sort of player that learns well from it? So again, comes back to psychology again, doesn't it? And their attitude. Would they be good learners? So that's what we want to find out a bit more about them and their background and how they respond when they are given instruction. But you rarely, even in academy football, going out until you get at least 16, you rarely see good movement in that sense. Players still get dragged to the ball. They can't time their runs right. They make a run across the goal too early, so that if they did get the ball, they'd be beyond the front post, and it's a really difficult finish. Whereas if they waited, if they delayed, if they went later from the back post, they'd have more goal to aim at. All these sorts of things. It is hard to find. And one of the big changes in the top level of professional game is I remember when Hernan Crespo and Gianluca Vialli came to Chelsea. They're both good examples of this. One of the things I noticed watching them play is that they both, when they got the ball at their feet, they struck the ball very early before they'd run very far with it. They would invariably strike the ball early. And I really thought about that. And why do they do that? And then I thought, well, it's because often when you're travelling with the ball, you're travelling across the goal. The further you go, the narrower the goal gets. If you strike it early when you're central, you've got more goal to aim at. And it was an obvious thing once I'd seen it and I understood it, but it wasn't something that I automatically realised. And that's from watching top players doing things differently and then challenging yourself. Why do they do that? Why when we watch Manchester City, do they very rarely cross the ball from down near the corner flag? Well, it's because very few goals are scored from crosses from down near the corner flag. So they rework the ball and they pass it around. And lots of fans get really disappointed when their team get down, attacking position, and they check back and play it. Well, why are they doing that? Put the ball in the mixer. But actually, it's from the stats that you very rarely score goals from crosses down by the corner flag. So, okay, Guardiola's and the other coaches are smart enough to say, okay, then we won't do it. We'll do something else. We'll find a more productive way. So again, it's challenging yourself. And do young players look at games and think like that? Probably not. They're probably not brought up to analyse games that way. Certainly supporters don't. So goes back to what you said right at the beginning. Most supporters are not going to see the game in that way, and that's fine. That's okay. But
it's summer holidays. So if you ask most people what they believe the meaning of the word packing is, they'll think it's something to do with putting clothes in a suitcase. And this is something that was completely new to me. I know the player that developed it, Stefan Reinhardt, from all the times that I spent on the Bundesliga. So basically, packing, measuring how many times a player plays the ball forward, dribbles it, how many opponents are bypassed, and in doing so, you look at the number of goals that emanate from situations like that. And apparently it's 30 to 40% of games where the team gets more packing points, because you award points for that, they win the game.
Yeah. Well, everyone's looking for the holy grail of data analysis. I talk in the book about this whole chapter on data and the data revolution. And of course, at first, lots of people thought, well, the team that has most possession will win the game, And so we have a whole generation of coaches that think, let's keep the ball. And in one sense, you say, well, yeah, if you don't let the opposition have the ball, you should win, shouldn't you? Well, no, it doesn't actually work like that, as became apparent. And the most famous game of that was that Brazil against Germany game, where Brazil had, whatever it was, 70% of possession and lost 5-1. And we see it a lot. You look at the Premier League last year, Nottingham Forest, would defend very strongly, very robust defending, very solid, and hit on the counter. So, therefore, the possession stats are not the holy grail. Okay, so what everyone is looking for, well, what is the key metric that will show that if you do this, you win games? And, of course, we know, or we sense, there isn't just one metric, because football is a complex game. But one of the really interesting ones, and it's a great surprise and eye-opener for me when I first read about it as well, was this idea of packing. And if you pass forward, as you say, and you take 3 or 4 of the opponents out of the game, that is a good thing to do. And so I started thinking about that, and started reading up about it. As you say, it came from Impact, the German company that Stefan was involved in setting up and so on. And now a lot of managers like Thomas Tuchel, manager of England, they're big fans of this as one way to look at the game. But once I read about it, I started to look at the game differently, because then you say, okay, that pass that takes 3 or 4 opponents out, or that dribble, that is a good thing. Yeah. Well, who's making the runs to make that pass possible? And then when you think about defending against packing, the good packing pass or whatever, who are the defenders that make that hard? Who are the defenders that will get in the way, intercept and block? So it was just another way of looking at the game, and this was after being in football all my life, of reading something and thinking, well, that's interesting, that's a different way, I've learned something new, what does it mean? And then running with that. And it certainly changed the way that I looked at players and assessed what was a good player, what was a good performance, and what wasn't. And so that's where football is fascinating, that it throws up all of these things. They can't yet, I understand, yet find an automated way of measuring packing. So that's what the big movement is to do. It has to virtually be done manually, which is very time consuming and very difficult. But I'm sure it won't be far away.
Your position profiles. This is another aspect of the book where we look at profiles of positions, and you go to everything. I mean, again, just going back to this book, there is an exhaustive amount of detail in here, which is why I keep going back to that. If you have, 100 people wanting to take up a position that you've just advertised, you have to give them this book so that they can read it, and just say, read it. And after that, you tell me that you can do everything in here. I'm looking at the goalkeeper position profile. Of course, it's different, but you're saying, so invariably 6'3" or over. That is it. So if you have anybody coming through, would you simply dismiss anybody based on height? If you had I'm thinking of Pickford, obviously.
Well, that has certainly happened in the past, that for years and years, goalkeeping coaches in the academies here have said, we're looking for the goalkeepers who we reasonably can expect to be 6'3" or above. On the basis, and the argument, of course, is that if you have a really good goalkeeper, at 6'3" and a really good goalkeeper at 5'10", will take the one who's the really good one at 6'3". Doesn't mean you take less the goalkeeper. Now that is beginning to change, I think, which is really interesting. The most expensive goalkeeper in the world, Kepa, or Arrizabalaga, at Chelsea, is about 5'11", I think, not quite 6 foot. So already that's a challenge to that. And I think it is beginning to shift a little bit. But still the argument is, in a physical, competitive, athletic league like the Premier League, if you have a goalkeeper that can command the box, can come out and take the opposition's possession out with one good catch or a good punch, as well, I guess, but certainly keep possession, that is a major advantage. You're more likely to be able to do that if you have the physicality to command the box, and so that's why they want bigger keepers to do it. And then there's the arguments about, getting down, being able to cover the goal, that extra stretch that the bigger goalkeepers might have, played off against their agility and so on. But generally, you need to be a decent height. I wouldn't say now 6'3", I would say 6 foot though. So I think back in the day when I was a kid, there were lots of good goalkeepers who were under 6 foot or were thought to be good at the time. But the game has changed in its requirements and has got more selective, I suppose. But I would say 6 foot. If you're not going to be 6 foot and above, then you will struggle to get in as goalkeeper.
If you're looking for your centre-backs, then you have a choice. You give us a choice. We can either have a cat or a dog.
Indeed.
I love this. The cats are like stones, and the dogs, I'm not sure you quite like it. The dogs are like Harry Maguire. Absolutely. But you want a combination of both.
Yes.
Really. So if you had a combination of both, of course, you will be looking at Thiago Silva.
Yes.
Most coaches are looking for height and aerial ability as well as being able to distribute the ball, obviously. And again, how difficult is it to find the amalgamation then of a cat and a dog? There aren't many out there, are there?
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. It is very difficult. You'll see lots of players, particularly in academy football in England, who are centre-backs, and when you ask scouts about them, they say, it moves the ball, passes the ball lovely, can play out from the back, right and left foot, moves it quickly. And I say, but can he win the ball? Because he's a defender, first of all. Is he going to win us the ball? Not so good at that. You think, what are our priorities as a defender? So it is very difficult. There are lots of examples at the top level. John Terry is a great example, really good footballer, right foot and with his left, much underrated as a footballer technically, but of course a real winner, physicality, compete and all that sort of thing as well. So they are very hard to find. The Thiago Silvas, who can make Rio Ferdinand, another good example of the players that can do both, But they do tend either to be midfield, fancy Dans, who like to play as a sweeper, don't really like marking people, will always be the spare one at the back, stroll about, making sure their hair looks good. That sort of centre-back. Or you'll see those with sort of like busted nose and, ready to fight anybody and really get in the ball first. So obviously, I'm exaggerating, but you see the extremes here that you have. And it's rare to see someone who can really compete and is ready to compete and mark somebody one-to-one defending, but is also a good footballer and can play out well from the back. That is tough to find. And to find them left-footed, that is the unicorn.
Two of the most difficult positions to look for, possibly fullbacks, those that can play as part of a back four, those that need to be wing backs, and this defensive central midfield play, those that are playing in this 4-2-3-1. You being at Chelsea, the club that produced a player that made the position his own by his name, the Makaleli role, the one that requires perhaps the most or the highest amount of tactical understanding.
Yeah, and it is a real challenge because often you find the players who go into that position or put into that position are really good at winning the ball. They're quick, they get around, but they're not great passers of the ball. So N'Golo Kante even after winning the Premier League with Leicester, I thought when he first came to Chelsea, his passing wasn't great, but it got a lot better. Moises Caicedo now at Chelsea.
Yeah.
I think it's a tremendous midfield player in terms of his athleticism. Wasn't sure about him technically. I think he's really growing as a player, and he's going to continue to do really well. So it's hard to find that balance. You do sometimes have a Pirlo or a Fabregas who can sit back there and who is a quarterback, like we say, the passing pivot in that midfield. But again, it's the combination to find. Do you think of any midfielders now? Tim, if you think back a few years, who are the midfielders that again can win the ball and can use it? Do you think Roy Keane, Patrick Vieira, and then where do you go after that? Declan Rice, maybe. Now, I'm just thinking of the English game again. Finding people who've got both sides of the game is hard. You talk about fullbacks. Used to be the case that when we're looking at fullbacks, we're thinking, well, they've got to be quick because we want them to overlap. And I was talking to a coach in summer about a fullback and saying, I'm not sure he's particularly quick, though. This coach was very keen on this fullback. And I said, I don't see him quick. He said, I'm not worried about that now because we want our fullbacks to push into midfield, into central positions to create overload. So they need to be good footballers. And I said, so you're not worried if he's not quick? No, not anymore. I think, hang on a minute, let me catch up with this. It's changed again. So you often see teams now. Man City used to do it a lot with their left backs. Arsenal with their right backs. John Stones, of course, when he was a centre back, and those defenders are required to step into midfield when your team is in possession to create overloads. Well, that's fine, and I get that, but that's a different skill set than the left back who was expected to be, bombing down the left wing on an overlap, And so again, the game changes all the time and the requirements on players changes. That's why it was to set out all the position profiles is always going to be a challenge because it sets it in stone, as it were, in a very fluid situation. But it's what people ask for, what scouts ask for. When I say, we want a left back. Okay, well, what do you want them to do then? We need a centre back. Well, what sort of centre back do you want? So you have to have in a club these position profiles, the ideals, to say that's what I mean. Man, if you want to get me a good centre back, this is what I mean by a good centre back, and give these examples, and that's why we use them and how they're used in the game. But it is a very fluid situation. Game is changing all the time. The boys who are 9 and 10 now in an academy, they'll be playing a very different game when they're 18, 19, 20. It will change again. And that, again, is one of the reasons it makes it so difficult to forecast whether they will be successful or they'll be what's needed. It will be a different game by then.
And your role, you're reporting on players and how you do these reports. I mean, it's different, as you say, to every level. I mean, you begin with, grassroots, and academies have scouts that have all this data that's being managed centrally. You putting together things, basic information, thumbnails. So you'll have match details, the description, the strengths, the weaknesses, performance rating again. So whilst you're watching, this is all being noted as well. And one really interesting point that you make is some clubs that want this will tell you to go to a game and say, well, get me all the information on him, and him.
Yeah.
So you're actually watching 3 or 4 different players trying to accumulate this information. Even if you have got an app on your phone, it's not easy, surely.
Well, it's even worse than that, Tim, because often a lot of clubs will say, I want 10 thumbnails. I want a snapshot of 10 of the players that are playing, And so if you're watching academy football, you won't necessarily know the names of any of those players. There's no team sheets.
Yeah, so I love this. Is brilliant.
You spend the first 5 or 10 minutes thinking, what's the coach calling him? What's his name? So again, you've got to stand near the coaches if they'll let you, and you're trying to catch. What are they? What's their name? So you can put their name down and then describe them. Or you might say, well, the number 10 in the Blues was, little lad, wiry, skinny, right-footed, whatever. it'd be handy if you know his name, and you're waiting for the coach to shout out, right, Tim Capel, do this, and you think, right, thank you very much, that's the name. It sadly doesn't happen very often. So you can spend all your time, certainly the first half an hour at least at a game, and you'll see scouts marking out on a pitch, that one's there, in descriptions, and if they're there from academies, they're asking their mate from another academy, do you know any of these? Got any names? This is what we would say. And never mind what's happening in the game. And you can regularly miss goals. So many times that happens when you're having to make your notes. They score. Who scored? What was that? And there's no replay, of course, when you're watching it live on out on an academy pitch. It's a nightmare. Why do we do it? The more I talk about it, I can't believe I've done this for 30 years.
Because you're looking for these, you're looking, apart from all of that, you've then got this list of key performance indicators, dribbling, crossing, finishing, tackling, pressing, and recording all of this as well. I mean, you have to be incredibly well organised. I mean, I've sat next to scouts at tournaments before, at youth and international tournaments. I mean, we used to do Toulon for years and years before anybody from the UK ever used to go down there. So you used to get used to sitting next to some of the South Americans and the Europeans and the Italians in particular. But, it's not just a question of having a pen and a bit of paper. The level of organisation is just off the scale.
It is. And of course, when you're looking at older players, say 17, 18 and above, senior players, you can have a lot of that information before you even get to the game. You'll know who the teams are, for example. Obviously, you'll know the names. And there are apps and websites out there that will give you performance data as you're watching a game. It's already been translated into performance data. So that is a massive help. And I always say that makes that scouting a lot easier. Because the real art of it, and it is the art of scouting in that sense, is when you turn up out in the cold and wet, nowhere to sit, you're out in the weather, you're by the side of a pitch, an academy game, and you have no team sheet, you don't know, and you're being asked to report on 10 players. Now, that's scouting. That takes some doing to do that. And
you've got to go as well. After you've gone through this process, your key performance indicators, and you're moving on to the next stages as well, you're now looking at aspects outside of the football environment. So you're looking at their social media and social media profiles. And there's a great piece in the book about one current international player from a club who had interest from another Premier League club, and they, on investigation, didn't like the number of times that his social media posts picked up the name Nando's and takeaways.
Absolutely true. The clubs have software that will analyse someone's feed on whatever social media platform, and so this isn't done manually. There's programs that will rattle through your social media feed and come up with common words or phrases, And so when you're spending a lot of money on a player, you go into whatever detail you can, and that is absolutely true. And it's also interesting. So the club I was working for at the time decided not to pay a lot of money for that player, who went on to a very good career, but has always had weight problems, funnily enough. And every time I see him, I think, has he been at the Nando's again?
Are the real heroes in this scouting, the guys that do the grassroots scouting? These guys going out Saturday mornings and Sundays and whatever, and just beginning and having to start to build up a network of contacts, starting from the very, very bottom. You mentioned the name of one guy, Ray Rembridge from Chelsea, whose record is unbelievable, isn't it? Over 60 players have ended up signing to the academy off of his talent ID skills. Reece James, Conor Gallagher being two of them. I mean, it all starts there, doesn't it?
Yeah,
I'm finding a scout that can do it.
That's the heart of scouting. And, that is because everybody, as I said before, every top player has had someone scout them right at the beginning some way, usually at a very early age, and that is the real talent. The priority recruitment age for most academies is 6, 7, and 8. So let's be clear, that is your priority, because if you get them then, A, they don't cost you anything, but B, you're going to have them for longer and they grow up with you and you can develop them more. That's the most competitive ages, which is remarkable, isn't it? And so there are scouts who specialise in going out and finding players of that age, and they are the ones who get loads and loads of signings in clubs, because it's the numbers game in that sense. But you're absolutely right, Tim. You have to build a network. If you go to a game with Ray, and I've been to many with Ray Renbridge, and in southwest London is this area in particular. If you were walking around a pitch at a non-league ground with Ray, it takes you about half an hour to get round to the seats, because everybody knows him, and he is such a gentleman and has such a good reputation. Everybody wants to come and say hello and speak to him. Yeah. And a lot of them will say, hey, have you seen that kid and this is where he gets his information from, And so that's been built up over many years. And that is the classic way to be a grassroots scout, to work an area, get known, have a good reputation for honesty and dealing well with people, and be out there, turning up, 95% of success, turning up, out there every week, being around, seeing people, and then of course having a good eye. And if you scout at the younger ages, there are more players recruited. Then you've got more chance of success, and that's the way to be a successful scout, and that's the heart of recruitment.
One interesting point you make again in the book about these guys in this position is how you look when you turn up out there. Do you go dressed up in club identifiable kit, or do you go incognito? Although it does tend to have the look of a sort of, a 60s news hack, a hat on, the papers under there, looks like they've got a bit of remnants of food on them. Yes. But if you go and you are branded up, does it not draw the attention away from the game? Do the kids suddenly think, there's a scout in the crowd? And then you can see, the father pulling over little Johnny or Dave and telling, here, right, the Chelsea blokes here, you've got to put in a show.
But the key thing is, we're in summer now, Tim, and so it's summer tournaments, every weekend, every big summer tournaments, every happy hunting ground for scouts. And I always encourage my scouts to put club kit on. Why? Because it shows everybody we're interested. So it's really good PR. We're there. We are interested in finding kids in your area, in your team. So that's a really positive thing. Then it's partly an identification thing, although you need a photo pass as well from a safeguarding point of view. So that all helps. So I think it's important in grassroots scouting that scouts look the part, they're smart, they are your club at that moment. If they see someone they like and they speak to the coach of that team, they are your club. And so they've got to look right, they've got to present right, because that's your entire reputation of your club is distilled in that person when they are there at that moment. And it's interesting you say, talking about what scouts wear, because when you go to the other games, like if you go to an academy game, you can't wear the kit of your club because you're a guest of another club and you have to wear ordinary stuff. Some years ago, I was asked to do a TV advert for a well-known car website, and they wanted. I said to them, "Why do you want to do? Why have you picked me?" Well, they wanted a scout from a particular demographic. I said, "You wanted an old scout." That's what he said. An old white guy. So they said, "Fine." They turn up. So they said, we'll provide you with clothing to wear. And I said, oh, that'd be interesting. So I turned up and they got this stuff. I said, I would never wear that to a game. I'm not going to wear that. I look like a rag bag. I said, even though I can't wear branded stuff in terms of a club, I've got to be reasonably smartly dressed because I represent the club, there. So they eventually let me wear my own clothes at least. But that was interesting, again, of people's sort of mental image of a scout. Clearly, I met the physical profile, old white guy with a beard, but they had this image of a sort of rather seedy looking, as you say, almost Arthur Daly type, and that is the scout. And I was saying, well, it ain't me. But yeah, I think you've got to look the part. You've got to be professional. You've got to have the right authentication. Your right verification that you're from that club. That's a safeguarding absolute requirement. And still, you can get treated really badly by clubs and who might not want you there. So you've got to have a bit of a thick skin. But I think you've got to coat it in a reasonable standard of clothing. You are representing the club.
When you're sent to these games, these academy games, where you're sent to go and stand over by the cones or behind the cones as far away as possible, and you don't know any of the players' names, and you won't do unless it's a Category 1 or Category 2 game at around under 18 level. How do you find out the names? I mean, if they're not going to tell you, you think, well, why bother allowing people to come in? What is the point?
Yeah.
And then you start to wonder about things like Bosman. If somebody ever looked at that, how he got that turned into law, why people won't look at this and say, well, hang on a minute, if he sees Johnny Smith here, and he likes him and he can't sign it, well, that's a restraint of trade. So you're going to have to provide team sheets with names on.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise you're limiting people's right to make a choice to go and play. If you don't want him, they may.
Yes. If you go and scout a game in Holland, for example, when you turn up at the game, you're presented with a list of names and usually dates of birth as well of the players as a standard. It's just a routine. It's particularly in this country, we are so backward at the way that we treat scouts, and we hide behind arguments about safeguarding which don't apply. In that they're not an issue where this is concerned. You're a representative of a club. You're there with authentication and so on. And so it's a nonsense that clubs don't do it. So you have to get smart. You have to, again, develop a network. The experienced scouts who know each other and who can trust each other will share information on players. You're always wary as a scout about sharing it with people who are not going to share information with you, but you do help each other out. You do try and develop squad lists if you're well organised and so on. So there's ways around it. But at the end of the day, you are relying on the scout catching someone's name. And I can remember years ago, I went to watch a kid, an under 9 playing at Reading, and I thought this kid was terrific. And I thought his name was Damon, and he was really good. And I spoke to my boss about it at the time. I was working for Chelsea, and my boss, Darren Gray, said, "Oh, I've seen that age group. I don't remember seeing a kid who looked like that, but they had a kid I really liked, but I don't think his name was Damon. I think he was called." He said some other sort of game, Dennis or something. So anyway, we kept talking about this, and then we eventually realised we were talking about the same player whose name turned out to be Diamond. And so, but it took us months to get to that point of knowing even the first name of the player. And it's such a waste of effort and resource, And so it almost encourages scouts to be a bit underhand and to find out by other means. And so if you know a player and they used to play for you, now they're playing for that team, you might get someone to phone that parent up and say, "Who's that other kid who's playing in your team?" And because you're required to find this information out, and yet you're not given reasonable access to that information, so you have to try and find it out by other means, and that's not right. And that feeds into, again, this treatment of scouts and seeing them as dodgy, because they're often forced to find out information in underhand ways, and that's not healthy for the game.
One thing I wasn't aware of, I mean, I knew there was degrees of compensation. If you had a player that you'd signed on from under 9s and he played, all the way up to under 13 level and left, basically your bill would be £57,500. I mean, that is not an inconsiderable amount of money.
No, absolutely, and it depends what level of category, a category 1, the bigger ones, or 2 or 3, that the player has had year on year. And that can mount up. And if you get to a player 16, so who's been at a category 1 academy from under 9, probably be 250,000, something like that. So that's the training compensation, which it's called. But a really strange thing, Tim, is, and I've had direct experience of this in the last month, that if you go from one club, I go to another club and say, we're interested in buying Tim, who's an under 14, and we're prepared to pay the compensation. And the club can say, no, we're not interested in selling him. We'd want a lot more. So it's just a starting point, the compensation, if the players are registered. And I say, okay. And I said to the academy manager, well, all right, okay, I can understand you don't want to lose him. Will you tell the parents that we're interested? No. They're not obliged to even tell the parents that another club has made a approach. So I said, well, why wouldn't you? And they said, because if we told them, they'd want to come and join you. I said, well, where's their choice in this then? So you've got this crazy situation that, yes, there is a whole compensation scheme. It's only a guide for if they're actually, if they've left and gone somewhere else or become a free agent, then that's what will apply. But it's a guideline other than that. Clubs can ignore it, and they don't even have to tell the parents if another club has come in and offered them their child a chance to go to a bigger club.
It's amazing. It is amazing. And after you've got through, all of that, these different levels of scouting, grassroots, academy, or whatever, the most important aspect of the whole recruitment process, basically, is know whatever area you're in, inside out. You can't be a specialist in every area. You are an academy scout, you're a pro scout, you're a grassroots scout, and that is what you concentrate on. You can't be all three.
That's right. And people, because you need to build those networks. So you can't be building the networks in all areas. But of course, if you're a head of academy recruitment, then you're responsible for all those areas. So that's very demanding, and you have to be comfortable at making decisions in all the different spheres for the ages that you cover. So that is a great challenge, but very interesting, of course, to do it. But as scouts, when people say to me, I'd like to be a scout, that's great. What sort of scouting do you want to do? Well, what do you mean? And exactly as you say to them, do you want to do grassroots, out there finding unearthing the talent originally? Or do you want to go to academies? Or do you want to do senior stuff? Or even do you want to do opposition scouting, which is a very technical, more coaching-based sort of scouting, but it's still scouting. Now, unfortunately, I've done all of those, which is one of the reasons why the publishers came to me to ask me to write the book. Most scouts will do one or other of those, or maybe a couple, but will specialise for sensible reasons in one specific sphere of scouting.
I've got to mention a couple of things. I mean, otherwise, this is such an interesting topic. You could talk about it all day long. And obviously, I realise we can't, regardless of how interesting this is. But one is the data, the big data companies, these teams of analysts. If you look at various employment hubs and websites and whatever, you'll see many ads for, do you love football? Do you want to go out and get paid to watch football? And it will be these companies wanting you to go out with a pad and a pen or a mobile phone they'll give you and record the data. Yeah. And again, the most bizarre thing about this to me is when you consider the potential value of the end product, whatever, why would you entrust giving the data accumulation to people, and especially if it's overseas, and you're talking about people in low-wage economies, which you mentioned in the likes of Philippines and India, why would you entrust that information, which is so important that you get 100% right, to people that you're paying nothing?
Yeah, it is a mystery in that sense, a conundrum. So much of first-team scouting, 95% of first-team scouting at the top levels now is done by video. That's a massive change in the last 10 years, accelerated by COVID. But 95% of first-team scouting is done by video. So at the ages from 18 and above, you can get video, you can get data, and there are companies who crunch these numbers together, and it's a data processing requirement, and so that it will go out, it will be farmed out to the places where that labour is cheap and those processing is cheap, because it's general data processing that is done. And so you will have people who will sit with special keyboards going through video after video, and they are just tagging a game. You know, this happened then, this player did this and this. There's no assessment in that. They are just tagging what is happening in a game. And that provides the basic data. Then that is used by the data analyst to then say, what is that data telling us about these players? Which one is doing well? Which one do we like? And that sort of begs the question, what are you looking for, and so on. And so we now have this whole industry that is there that is driving a lot of the recruitment. Ultimately, you have to have people who make a judgment on whether that player is right for you or not. But a lot of it now is based on data. Consequently, you see at the top level, a lot of the people who are now running recruitment come from an analysis background. There's fewer and fewer of the traditional scouts who are still in those positions of decision making at the top level. More and more, you'll see people who come from an analysis background, because the data is so important. And we spoke before about, you know, the companies looking for what is the holy grail of the measurement, what is the key metric, and it's a massive industry, and it won't change now. So it won't go backwards. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. And so at the top level, data is king, you know, and will remain so. In there still has to be some of that judgment, I think. And this is where the old stagers like me has something to offer. You know, when I finished managing in football, I really wanted to get into scouting properly. I went and did a course through the League Managers Association on using data for performance analysis, because I was determined not to get left behind by all this football manager generation of people coming up who are so comfortable with the data and using it. And it's part of our lives now, all the time, particularly when you're doing recruitment from 18s and above. Still, though, we come back to, where do those players first get scouted? And that's out in England, it's out on the parks, and that is the old basic grassroots scouting. You know, and that's the old-fashioned stuff, because there's no data then. So you've got to, if you want to get into scouting, you've got to be comfortable with both. You've got to have that eye, you've got to have that experience and that judgment of all the things we've spoken about. But you've got to be you've got to be comfortable putting it in a format so it can be digitized, which is reporting or apps and so on. And if you're doing the senior stuff, you've got to be comfortable with using the data.
Perfect. Oh, and lastly, who's got the best scouting setup in the Premier League?
Well, who's got the best players? Because that's you know, so that's the football's a practical game, isn't it? So it's who's winning. So you say, well, Liverpool have at the moment, last season. But when you look at who are the clubs who really get great value, you know, because you might say, well, yeah, is that just a matter of who can afford to spend the most money? But when you look at the clubs who can really get good value, you'd have to look at Brentford and be impressed, I think, by their consistent identification of talent that they bring in. Again, very much database, of course, their approach, and then they sell on and have done very well out of it. So Brentford, Brighton to some extent, these are very much data-driven clubs who've done very well, I think, in their recruitment. But ultimately, then, you know, the best players, I suppose, you need a combination of recruitment and money to get them in.
I'll leave you one last point, because you bring this up in the book. There was a report 2016-2017, and it would be interesting to know how this has changed. But at the end of that season, the Premier League had 8.5% of players in those had come through the academies. 71.2% were paid for transfers. And how that compared with places like in Liga A, where it was 23% of their players came through from academies, and in La Liga, where it was 35% were paid for transfers. The Premier League has by far and away the highest amount of paid for deals coming in from other places. And you can see it already this summer with the money that's going out the door.
Yeah. So because the Premier League grew out of our old Division 1, our old football league, we fall into the trap of thinking that it is an English league. The Premier League is an international league that happens to be based in England. That's the way I think it's much more useful to look at it, because the standard and the competitiveness is so strong. That's why, our clubs do so well in the European competitions and so on. And it's fantastically difficult to break in at that level, because again, it goes back to what I talked about before in terms of your competition level. For an 18-year-old, you're at a big club and you're thinking, can I get in the first team? Normal sort of debut age in the Premier League is more like 21, 22, other than a sort of token appearance. I mean, a start, should we say, is going to be older and older and older than the other leagues as well in Europe, because it is so much of a higher standard. And it's a massive leap to jump in. So where the academy system in this country has done really well, in my view, overall, in producing players who are good enough to break into this top league. And we're seeing the benefit of that in the England international teams at 17, 19 and so on, who do way better than they've ever done before. It's been a massive change round. And when you look at the Bukayo Saka, Miles, Lewis Skelly, Ethan Amiri, all the Arsenal boys, you look at Bellingham, obviously, and both Bellinghams, and you look at Phil Foden and so on and so on. We're producing international standard players, world-class players from our academy system who are getting in, even though it's going to be difficult, and even though there's going to be fewer of them than Liga and Serie A and the La Liga. We are still producing players through the academy system who are making that huge leap into the Premier League, and that takes some doing. Good luck to them.
Well, that was Chris Robinson, and the book The Scouting Game is out now and available at all book retailers. And that is it for this edition of the show. But don't forget, if you're looking for inspiration for books to buy as you head off on vacation, then head over to the website, www.talkingsportsbooks.com, where you can find details and links to all of the books that we have featured over the last 6 years or so. And you can listen back, obviously, to all of those previous shows. We are going to be back late in August, and this is one of the books that we will be featuring. Enjoy the summer, and thanks for watching and listening. Until next time, from me, Tim Cable, bye-bye for now.